In the dying light of the 41st millennium, where hope is a forgotten language and faith is the only currency of survival, a shadow moves. Not a demon, not a god, but a man from another time, another world. Forged by tragedy and obsession, they say the galaxy belongs to the strong, to those who kill without mercy and rule without question. But what happens when something far more dangerous arrives? Something disciplined, calculated, unyielding? In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, a single question echoes through the void. What if the Dark Knight entered the Warhammer 40K universe? No superpowers, no backup, no Justice League. Just a mortal man with an unbreakable will, standing against gods, monsters, and madness itself. When fear becomes a weapon and justice becomes rebellion, one man's legend will challenge the very nature of this universe. This is the story of Batman, the silent shadow in the age of eternal war. When Batman enters the Warhammer 40K universe, the question of how and where he appears becomes crucial to shaping his entire journey. Imagine a sudden tear in reality, an unstable warp anomaly forming somewhere on the edge of Imperial space. From it, a shadowed figure emerges, disoriented yet composed. He is not a space marine, not a psyker, not even a known Xenos. To the Imperium, he is an anomaly, one who should not exist. Batman would immediately assess his surroundings with cold precision, taking in the Gothic spires, the oppressive atmosphere, and the endless roar of machinery. His first instinct would be survival, but not in the ordinary sense. He would want to understand this world, its laws, its power structure, and the threats that define it. This is not Gotham anymore. This is a galaxy where morality bends beneath the weight of war. If Batman arrived on a hive world, the scale of corruption and suffering would shock even him. He has faced crime lords and corrupt politicians, but here, entire populations live in perpetual misery under the iron rule of the Imperium. He would see the Arbites enforcing law with brutality, the ecclesiarchy preaching faith through fear, and the Mechanicus worshipping machines as gods. His detective mind would piece together that this civilization is ancient, stagnant, and bound by dogma. Yet beneath its tyranny, he would sense potential millions of oppressed souls yearning for hope. He would not reveal himself immediately. Instead, he would move through the shadows of the Underhive, learning the hierarchy, the gang networks, the trade routes, and the whispers of rebellion. In time, rumors would spread of a dark figure who strikes at night, who punishes slavers and heretics alike without a trace. Batman's first encounter with the Imperium would be one of misunderstanding. When the Arbites finally track him down, they would mistake him for a heretic or an unsanctioned assassin. His refusal to submit to the Emperor's law would mark him as dangerous. Surrounded and outgunned, Batman would use his gadgets and intellect to escape, leaving his pursuers questioning whether he was human or demon. The Inquisition would soon hear of this winged terror haunting the Underhive, prompting investigation. Interrogators might suspect chaos influence, given his technology and unnatural stealth. Batman would quickly realize that the Imperium is not a unified force of good. It's a vast machine sustained by fear and ignorance. He would also recognize that direct confrontation with such power is suicide. Instead, he would play the long game, becoming a myth within the system. His entry point determines not just his survival, but his purpose. If he lands near the frontier worlds, he might encounter the Astra Militarum, first ordinary soldiers fighting endless wars. Batman would likely respect their discipline and sacrifice, recognizing in them the same determination he carries within himself. He might even adopt a new persona to blend in, perhaps as a scout or covert operative assisting Imperial forces while secretly gathering intel. His analytical skills and combat training would make him a valuable asset, though his refusal to kill indiscriminately would draw suspicion. Over time, Stories would spread through the ranks of a mysterious warrior who saves units from ambushes and eliminates traitors in silence. Soldiers might call him the Nightshade or the Emperor's Shadow, never realizing he serves no master but his own moral code, if instead his arrival placed him near chaos-controlled territory. The story would unfold far more darkly. Batman would face horrors that defy logic: mutations, demonic incursions, whispers from the warp that claw at the mind. Even his immense willpower would be tested as he resists the corruption that seeps through reality itself. Chaos would recognize in him a powerful potential vessel, a being of trauma, obsession, and rage wrapped in control. The ruinous powers would tempt him, offering power to cleanse the galaxy of sin. But Batman's defining trait is resistance. His entire life is built on refusing corruption, and he would fight the warp's influence with the same stubborn defiance that kept him human after all his losses. He would study the demons not as monsters, but as psychological manifestations seeking their weaknesses. Where others see madness, he would see patterns. Regardless of his entry point, Batman's technology would both aid and endanger him. His suit, powered by materials and systems unknown to the Mechanicus, would instantly draw attention. Tech priests would brand him a tech heresy incarnate, desperate to dissect his armor and understand his tools. To them, he would be a walking blasphemy, a man who creates without worship. Batman, however, would see the Mechanicus as a corrupted reflection of his own relationship with technology. Devotion without understanding, innovation buried beneath ritual. He would hack into their systems, decode their machine cant, and learn the truth about the galaxy's technological decay. The realization that humanity has forgotten how to create would disturb him deeply, igniting a new mission to bring back true innovation, reason, and justice to a broken civilization. His arrival would ripple through the grimdark, setting like a stone in still water. Every faction would interpret him differently. The Imperium would see a heretic. The Mechanicus would see a mystery. The Inquisition would see a threat. Chaos would see a challenge. And the ordinary people, the hive workers, the soldiers, the enslaved would see a symbol. A shadow that strikes from nowhere, punishing tyrants and saving the weak without demanding faith. Batman would become a legend told in whispers, an impossible figure who defies the galaxy's endless despair. Even in a universe where hope is almost extinct, the presence of the Dark Knight would rekindle a dangerous idea that one man's will can still make a difference, even against the infinite darkness. Batman's first encounter in the Warhammer 40K universe would define his perception of the galaxy and determine whether he becomes an ally, a fugitive, or a mythic adversary. If his first contact is with the Imperium of Man, the meeting would be tense, suffocating, and governed by the paranoia of a civilization that worships authority and fears anything unknown. Imagine a world scarred by industry and ruled by the ecclesiarchy, where faith in the God Emperor is law and deviation is death. Batman would emerge from the shadows of a hive city, his presence already considered blasphemous. The local authorities, perhaps the Adeptus Arbites, would investigate reports of a cloaked figure attacking gang lords and rescuing laborers from execution. In the Imperium, heroism outside sanctioned faith is heresy. And so even his acts of justice would condemn him. The Arbites would come prepared, armed with shock mauls, bolters, and the unwavering belief that they serve divine justice. Batman would study their tactics, their rigid structure, their reliance on intimidation. He would realize quickly that they are instruments of fear, not protectors of the innocent. To him, they would mirror Gotham's corrupt institutions, but amplified to an inhuman scale. When cornered by a patrol, Batman would refuse lethal force, disabling them with precision strikes and gadgets beyond their understanding. To the Imperium, that would confirm his alien nature. They would assume he is a Xenos agent or a warp-born infiltrator, perhaps even a demon in disguise. Within days, word would reach the Inquisition, and his name, or rather, The myth of a shadowed heretic would begin circulating across the sector. If the Inquisition takes an interest, Batman's situation becomes more perilous. An Inquisitor would not see him as a man, but as a threat to be purged or exploited. Interrogators might attempt to capture him for study, seeking to understand the source of his technology and unnatural physical conditioning. Batman would analyze his pursuers in return, observing the complex hierarchy and the mixture of zealotry and intelligence that governs them. He would recognize that the Imperium's power lies not in logic but in belief. Every soldier, every priest, every Inquisitor acts out of faith rather than reason, and that would fascinate and disturb him. He might even infiltrate a local shrine or cathedral, studying how religion has replaced justice in this civilization. The idea of a man and emperor elevated to godhood would strike him as both tragic and dangerous. In Gotham, symbols are tools to inspire fear or hope. In the Imperium, symbols are prisons that enslave minds. However, if Batman's first encounter is not with the Imperium but with the forces of chaos, the tone changes drastically. Perhaps he awakens on a planet already consumed by the warp, its skies bleeding with impossible colors, its people twisted by corruption. He would see firsthand what unrestrained chaos looks like: a world without law, without sanity, without reason. The cultists would recognize something powerful in him: the discipline, the trauma, the darkness that defines his every action. They would whisper his name like a challenge, calling him a warrior of the shadow who belongs to the dark gods. They would offer him the power to cleanse Gotham, to rewrite destiny, to become eternal. The warp would sense his inner torment and feed on it. Visions of his parents' deaths, the screams of the innocent he could not save, and the endless futility of his mission would manifest as haunting whispers. Batman's will would be tested as never before. He would confront chaos not with faith, but with sheer logic and willpower. He would study the patterns of corruption, the symmetries within madness, trying to understand how chaos spreads and how to counter it. His mind would act as both fortress and weapon, rejecting temptation through discipline and analysis. The demons might grow curious about this mortal who resists them without divine aid. To them, he would represent the rarest of beings, a man who fights darkness not for power but out of an unbreakable moral code. They might taunt him with illusions of victory, showing him a universe where he rules without limits, but he would see through their deceit. For Batman, control is his religion. He would turn the warp's own illusions against it, manipulating its chaotic energy to escape or destroy its cultists. The warp might remember his defiance as a scar, an echo of order left behind in its eternal madness. In an alternate scenario, Batman's first contact could be with the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, humanity's genetically engineered super soldiers. Their encounter would be a clash of ideals. To the Astartes, Batman is a mere mortal, a curiosity who lacks divine sanction. Yet when they witness his combat skill, his tactical genius, and his ability to predict enemy movements with uncanny precision, some might hesitate before condemning him. Batman would study them with fascination, recognizing the perfection of the human form pushed to its absolute limit. But he would also see the tragedy, their loss of individuality, their blind devotion to a decaying empire. He would respect their discipline while condemning their unquestioning obedience. Some Astartes might see in him the echo of the Primarchs, especially in his ability to inspire loyalty through fear and respect. There is a chance that a single chapter, perhaps one with an independent streak like the Raven Guard or Dark Angels, might secretly observe him rather than destroy him. To them, he would be an anomaly worth understanding. No matter who he meets first, the Batman's analytical nature ensures that the encounter becomes a study. He would observe, adapt, and learn. His survival would depend not on raw power, but on intelligence, mapping the psychological and social structures of whichever faction he faces. If it is the Imperium, he would infiltrate it. If chaos, he would dismantle it from within. If the Mechanicus, he would learn its language and technology. If the Astartes, he would study their warfare. His first contact would not define him by allegiance, but by knowledge. In the 40K universe, information is rarer and more powerful than any weapon. His first encounter, then, becomes the foundation of a new identity. Not Bruce Wayne of Gotham, not the Dark Knight of Earth, but something the galaxy has never seen before, a man unbound by faith or corruption, navigating a reality that has long forgotten what justice truly means. Adapting to the technology of the Warhammer 40K universe would push Batman's ingenuity to its absolute limit. He has always been a master engineer, a man who built his arsenal through intellect, discipline, and endless experimentation. But in this grim future, technology is not a tool of progress, it is religion. The Mechanicus guards every scrap of knowledge like sacred scripture, and innovation is treated as heresy. Batman would find himself in a world where machines are worshipped, not understood, where science has fossilized into ritual. His first instinct would be disbelief at the sheer scale of technological decay. Humanity spans 1,000,000 worlds, yet most people do not even know how their own devices work. To him, this would be both horrifying and fascinating, a challenge unlike any he has faced before. He would begin by analyzing the tech surrounding him, breaking down the architecture of cogitators, lasguns, and servitors. His detective mind would instantly recognize that much of it is ancient and inefficient, repurposed from designs centuries old. He would see systems running on redundant energy loops, weapons that waste potential power, and vehicles maintained more by prayer than by logic. While others might be overwhelmed, Batman would thrive in this chaos. He has always been a scavenger of ideas, capable of reverse engineering alien tech or experimental systems. Using fragments of Mechanicus scrap, he would start building a new utility belt, recalibrating his sensors to detect warp distortions, radiation, and machine spirits. His approach would blend Earth's precision with 40K's brutal efficiency, creating devices that confuse both man and machine. But Batman's greatest challenge would not be the technology itself, it would be surviving in a culture that fears creation. The Adeptus Mechanicus would quickly take notice of his work. They would detect energy signatures and encrypted data streams that defy their understanding. To them, this would be no coincidence. A being who repairs or builds without invoking the omnicia would be branded a heretic, an unholy craftsman who dares to create without divine permission. Tech priests would send skittery forces to hunt him down, eager to dissect his devices and learn their secrets. Batman would study the Mechanicus with equal fascination, realizing they are not so different from the criminals of Gotham, driven by obsession, enslaved by ritual, blinded by power. He would infiltrate one of their forges, disguised as a low-ranking laborer, to observe their methods. There he would witness the irony of a society that calls itself advanced, yet chants over machines like monks before idols. He would note their reliance on pre-approved blueprints, their fear of innovation, and their near-total rejection of experimentation. It would disgust him, but also give him an advantage. Over time, Batman would adapt his technology to blend seamlessly into the Imperium's framework. He would disguise his gear as relics, masking their advanced functions beneath sacred symbols. His armor would evolve from sleek stealth plating to something resembling Astartes ceramite, but with internal systems far more complex. He would design adaptive camouflage that manipulates light and heat signatures, allowing him to vanish even from Auspex scans. His grapnel gun would be rebuilt using 40K magnetic polymers, capable of anchoring onto adamantium surfaces. The Batmobile, if ever recreated, would become a hybrid vehicle, a fusion of stealth fighter and ground skimmer, silent but deadly. Its systems powered by energy cells, disguised as holy relics. Batman would also confront a new kind of technological interface, the machine spirit. Every device in the Imperium is believed to have a soul, a consciousness that must be appeased before it functions. To a rational mind like his, The superstition would seem absurd at first. Yet, as he investigates deeper, he might realize there is some truth in it. In a galaxy where the warp influences all matter, even machines may possess echoes of awareness. He would experiment carefully, communicating with these spirits through data signals rather than prayer. Over time, he would learn to manipulate them, soothing, coercing, or overriding them with his own AI protocols. His relationship with machine spirits would become symbiotic. He provides logic and efficiency. They provide access and loyalty. To the Mechanicus, this would be blasphemy. To Batman, it would be evolution. He would also adapt his combat technology to counter the unique threats of the galaxy. Against chaos, he would develop null field devices capable of dampening warp energy, inspired by the study of pariah gene technology. Against orcs, he would design sonic disruptors that target their crude psychic field, neutralizing their belief-based mechanics. Against the Astartes, he would craft non-lethal but effective tools, amp charges that disable power armor systems without killing the user. His goal would never be dominance but understanding. Each battle would be a testbed, each victory a step toward mastering this universe's science through logic rather than faith. One of Batman's greatest adaptations would be psychological rather than mechanical. In Gotham, he uses fear as a weapon, manipulating the criminal mind through symbols and illusion. In the 40K universe, fear is already omnipresent. To stand out, he must evolve his tactics. He would integrate imperial iconography into his image, reshaping the bat symbol into a sigil that carries both myth and menace. To the Imperium citizens, he would become a saint of shadows. To the Mechanicus, a ghost in the machine. To chaos, a mind they cannot corrupt. He would build networks of informants, using data slates and encrypted Vox channels to coordinate operations across multiple hive levels. His command of technology would let him wage silent wars against corruption while remaining invisible. To those who control the Imperium surveillance systems, his adaptability would eventually lead him to develop hybrid tools, merging Earth's pragmatic science with 40K's exotic materials. He would construct drones capable of surviving warp storms, EMP-resistant cloaking fields, and enhanced medkits infused with nanotech synthesized from Mechanicus biogel. Every invention would serve a dual purpose: survival and infiltration. He would become a technological ghost, mastering systems that no one else in the galaxy fully understands. Over time, Batman's mastery of 40K technology would not just help him survive, it would make him something more. In a universe where innovation is sin and ignorance is holy, he would become the embodiment of forbidden knowledge, a living reminder that progress, even in the darkest future, cannot be silenced forever. The creation of the Bat Chapel or Bat Fortress in the Warhammer 40K universe would be one of Batman's most ambitious undertakings, a reflection of both his tactical brilliance and his ability to adapt symbols to new realities. He has always relied on the Batcave as a sanctuary, a place where he can retreat from chaos, analyze information, and rebuild himself. In the 41st millennium, he would need something far greater, a stronghold capable of surviving bombardments, hiding from orbital scans, and resisting the corruption of the warp. His base would not simply be a fortress of stone and steel, but a living entity of strategy, secrecy, and technological mastery hidden in the most unlikely of places. Choosing the location would be his first and most critical decision. On a hive world, he might carve his base into the Underhiv's forgotten depths, buried beneath kilometers of industrial ruins. He would search for a section long abandoned by the Mechanicus, filled with broken machinery and radiation leaks that keep others away. If he found himself on a frontier planet, he would take advantage of natural terrain, underground caverns, volcanic tunnels, or the hollow remains of ancient xenostructures. He would make the environment his first defense, constructing pathways and traps that confuse intruders. Every corridor would serve a purpose, every chamber designed with layered contingencies. Batman's sense of control and preparation would reach new heights here. The Bat Fortress would be both sanctuary and weapon, a reflection of his mind, cold, precise, and unyielding. Its construction would require both stealth and innovation. Without access to conventional resources or allies, Batman would gather materials through scavenging and subterfuge. He would dismantle Mechanicus scrap, hijack supply convoys, and repurpose components from abandoned manufactorums. Using his knowledge of the Imperium's rigid systems, he would forge false records, masking his supply trail as routine maintenance or clerical error. The fortress's power systems would be an ingenious hybrid of Imperial and salvaged Earth technology, utilizing plasma conduits and geothermal energy stabilized by his own designs. He would harden its internal structure with ceramite plating and reactive armor layers capable of absorbing kinetic impacts. The core systems would run on encrypted AI constructs he creates from fragments of corrupted data engines. Programmed not to serve, but to assist digital guardians with no faith, no prayer, only logic. Inside, the Bat Fortress would mirror his earthly Batcave in function, but not in style. Gone would be the sleek modern lines. Here, Gothic architecture would dominate, blending with the grim aesthetic of the galaxy. Stone arches reinforced with adamantium ribs would rise over tactical consoles. Ancient statues of faceless angels repurposed to conceal weapon racks, and holographic maps glowing faintly in the dim light. The sound of machinery would echo like whispers of a cathedral, the hum of reactors like a chant. Batman would not reject this aesthetic but rather weaponize it, using the galaxy's own symbols of faith and death to mask his operations. To anyone who stumbled upon it, the structure would appear as a forgotten shrine or relic of the dark age of technology. To him, it would be home, a cathedral of order in a universe ruled by chaos. The Bat Chapel would serve not only as a tactical base, but as a psychological anchor. In a world where hope is nearly extinct, Batman would use it as a reminder of his purpose. Within its halls, he would store data on the factions of the Imperium, the Xeno species, and the corrupt forces of chaos. Walls would be lined with screens displaying intercepted Vox transmissions, planetary maps, and profiles of key figures, inquisitors, rogue traders, tech priests, and warlords. Every piece of intelligence would be cataloged and cross-referenced through his custom network. This fortress would be his new Bat computer, but its intelligence would span galaxies instead of cities. It would predict movements of armies, estimate the spread of heresy, and track the flow of resources between sectors. With this information, he could strike surgically, destroying corruption, not through armies but through precision and fear. He would not live there alone forever. Over time, Batman would attract followers, individuals disillusioned with the Imperium's cruelty, but still loyal to humanity. Some would be deserters from the Astra Militarum, others outcasts from the Mechanicus or civilians who witnessed his work. To them, he would be a myth turned real, a silent guardian who offers purpose without preaching. The Bat Fortress would evolve into a haven for these lost souls. Under his command, they would undergo rigorous discipline, trained not as soldiers but as agents of order. He would teach them stealth, logic, and control, turning them into an underground network of operatives, his new Bat family in a galaxy that has forgotten compassion. They would refer to him with reverence but also fear. Understanding that his mission is not to conquer but to cleanse, the fortress would contain specialized chambers for research, training, and experimentation. One wing might serve as a laboratory where Batman dissects captured technology, examining alien weapons, decoding Mechanicus encryption, and studying warp-tainted relics under strict containment protocols. Another section would act as an armory, housing stealth armor variations adapted for different planetary conditions, from toxic atmospheres to void environments. He would design modular vehicles suited for infiltration rather than war hover bikes, compact transports, and gliders that can operate undetected even under Auspex surveillance. Everything within the fortress would serve a tactical function. But everything would also reflect his philosophy, efficiency, precision, and moral control. As his presence grows, rumors would spread through the hive underworld and among frontier settlements. Tales of a fortress where machines whisper and shadows move like living beings. Some would call it a heretic's lair, others an angel's sanctum. The Inquisition would send spies to investigate, yet none would return. Within those walls, Batman would orchestrate a silent rebellion against corruption. He would intercept messages meant for the Arbites, expose rogue psychers to the Inquisition before they cause destruction, and redirect supply chains to starving colonies. Every move would be a calculated act of balance, restoring fragments of justice without drawing open attention. In time, the Bat Fortress itself would become a myth of its own. To the oppressed, it would symbolize hope. To the Imperium, a ghost story used to scare the unfaithful. The Mechanicus might refer to it as a lost forge, blessed by the Omnissiah, while chaos cults would whisper of it as a cursed labyrinth that consumes intruders. Batman would not care for the myths. To him, the fortress would represent one thing: the possibility of order amid the eternal war. It would be the heart of his mission in a universe that believes only in despair, a place where logic and will are the last lights that refuse to die. When Batman finally encounters the Adeptus Astartes, the legendary space marines of the Imperium, it would be a confrontation between two different interpretations of human perfection. On one side stands the Dark Knight, a mortal man who forged himself into a weapon through will, intellect, and discipline. On the other are the Astartes, post-human warriors created by gene engineering and divine purpose, bred for war and obedience. Their meeting would not be one of equals in strength, but of equals in conviction. Batman would see in them a distorted mirror of his own ideals, humanity's obsession with control and transformation pushed to its most extreme form. They would see him as an anomaly, a man who fights like a demigod, but claims no allegiance to the Emperor. The initial interaction would be tense, charged with mutual curiosity and distrust. If the meeting takes place on a war-torn world, Batman might intervene in a battle where an Astartes strike force is executing a purge. He would witness their efficiency, their precision, and their complete lack of hesitation. Civilians caught in the crossfire would be ignored, treated as collateral damage or potential heretics. Batman, unable to stand by, would step into the chaos to save lives, disrupting the Astartes operation. The Marines would interpret his actions as interference or even treason. When they finally confront him, their massive armored forms towering over his mortal frame, Batman would not flinch. He would analyze them with the same intensity he once reserved for metahumans, calculating their armor joints, reaction time, and formation tactics. His refusal to submit would catch their attention. A mortal who stands firm before an Astartes without fear is not easily dismissed. Their first clash would be physical but brief. Batman would use stealth, agility, and technology to evade their blows rather than meet them head-on. Against one Marine, he could perhaps disable armor sensors or exploit mobility gaps. Against a squad, his goal would be survival and escape, not victory. Yet even in retreat, he would make an impression. The Astartes would recognize his tactical intelligence, his ability to anticipate and counter maneuvers designed by minds trained for centuries of war. They would report his existence to their superiors, describing a figure who moves with unnatural precision and fights with honor but defies command. To the Imperium, that description would sound dangerously close to heresy, yet intriguing enough to warrant investigation. Over time, Batman's analytical mind would lead him to study the Astartes in depth. He would infiltrate data archives, observe battlefield recordings, and learn their combat doctrines. The more he learns, the more he would respect them and pity them. Their devotion to the Emperor, their surrender of individuality, Their eternal servitude to an empire that no longer understands humanity would strike him as tragic. They are the ultimate soldiers but prisoners of faith. He would see the same psychological conditioning that he once fought against in Gotham's criminals, though here it serves a different master. Batman would conclude that the Astartes are both symbols of human potential and warnings of its excess. They are what humanity becomes when emotion is stripped away in the pursuit of perfection. Some chapters would interest him more than others. The Raven Guard, masters of stealth and infiltration, would fascinate him. He would recognize kindred spirits in their use of shadows and deception as tools of warfare. If he ever observed them in action, he might even admire their tactics, realizing how their gene seed and training make them living embodiments of what he once aspired to be. Yet even they are bound by loyalty and ritual. The Dark Angels, secretive and burdened by guilt, would remind him of his own obsession with redemption. Their secrecy would draw him in, and he might attempt to uncover their mysteries, earning their hostility but also their respect. Batman's curiosity would not be driven by arrogance, but by the same compulsion that drives him to understand every enemy he faces. Knowledge is his weapon, and in the 40K universe, it would be his shield against forces that can crush planets. Eventually, he would find himself forced to work alongside a Space Marine strike team, perhaps against a chaos incursion. The Marines would not trust him, but they would recognize his efficiency. On the battlefield, Batman would move like a shadow among giants, exploiting terrain, disrupting enemy formations, and coordinating civilian evacuations with surgical precision. His presence would confuse both allies and enemies. The Marines fight to annihilate, while he fights to preserve. When the battle ends, they would question him, not out of respect, but out of necessity. How can a mortal achieve so much without faith, without the Emperor's blessing? His answer would be simple: discipline, reason, and the will to never surrender. To the Astartes, these are virtues, but hearing them from a man who denies divine purpose would be heretical. Some Astartes might begin to doubt their understanding of humanity. After meeting him, they would see that courage and morality can exist without the Emperor's light. Others would view him as a dangerous anomaly, a threat to the stability of the Imperium's ideological foundation. If he survived long enough to earn their reluctant respect, they might even consult him in matters of strategy, recognizing his unparalleled ability to predict outcomes and assess weaknesses. Batman would in turn learn from them their discipline, their unshakable focus, their resilience under unimaginable pressure. He would internalize these traits, refining his own methods to adapt to the endless war of this universe. In a way, they would teach each other, but not all encounters would be peaceful. Some chapters, particularly those consumed by zealotry like the Black Templars, would see him as a blasphemer to be purged. They would hunt him relentlessly, considering his refusal to worship the Emperor as proof of chaos taint. Batman would not retaliate with killing. He would use their aggression as a means to study their doctrine, understanding the psychology of fanaticism. His tactics against such enemies would evolve into manipulation using misinformation, decoys, and psychological warfare to outwit even superhuman minds. He would become a phantom to them, an unkillable symbol that their faith cannot extinguish. Ultimately, Batman's interaction with the Astartes would crystallize his place in the 40,000 universe. He would remain an outsider among warriors, who embody humanity's greatest physical achievements, but its most limited spiritual understanding. Where they rely on faith, he relies on logic. Where they follow orders, he questions them. Where they see divinity, he sees design. And yet, beneath their differences, they share the same core belief that humanity must endure, no matter the cost. In that shared conviction, even the mightiest Space Marine might recognize the shadowed mortal before him, not as an enemy, but as something far rarer, a man who, without mutation or divine will, has made himself into a legend. Stealth has always been Batman's most defining weapon, the art that allows him to turn fear into power. In Gotham, he uses shadows, silence, and psychological manipulation to control the battlefield. But in the Warhammer 40K universe, stealth becomes more than an advantage, it becomes survival. A galaxy ruled by constant war, where orbital sensors sweep entire planets and psychers can sense thoughts across distances, offers no room for mistakes. Batman would quickly realize that his traditional methods are obsolete here. Smoke grenades and dark alleys mean little in a world where thermal scanners, Auspex devices, and psychic tracking are commonplace. To adapt, he would need to reinvent the very concept of invisibility, turning it into something that defies both technology and superstition. The first lesson he would learn is that stealth in this universe is not about hiding from eyes, but from belief. The Imperium's people live in a world where everything is seen through the lens of faith. To them, a shadow moving in the dark is either a demon or a miracle. Batman would exploit this psychology as much as physical concealment. His presence would be wrapped in myth, his movements carefully staged to evoke supernatural terror. He would study the rituals and fears of each faction and use them as camouflage. Among hive dwellers, he would appear as a spectral saint, among chaos cults as a judgment spirit, among the Mechanicus as a rogue machine spirit haunting the underhalls. He would let each group believe their own story, allowing the myth to cover his tracks better than any cloak could. Technologically, Batman would push his stealth gear to a new level. His suit would evolve beyond Earth's fabric technology into something capable of bending the limits of physics as understood in the 41st millennium. He would modify it with adaptive camouflage that reacts not just to light, but to radiation, electromagnetic waves, and psychic detection. Drawing from fragments of Mechanicus data, he might design a reactive armor layer that shifts heat signatures, blending seamlessly into environments ranging from the frozen wastes of an ice world to the toxic haze of a forge planet. He would also develop signal dampeners that scramble Auspex readings, making him appear as nothing more than background interference. His utility belt would carry tools that release micro-electromagnetic pulses, momentarily blinding sensor systems without triggering alarms. Even the sound of his movement would be masked by vibration nullifying boots adapted from anti-grav stabilizers scavenged from ruined tech. But technology alone cannot hide him from the warp. Psychers, those who can see into the immaterial realm, would represent a new kind of threat. They could sense intent, emotion, and willpower, all of which Batman possesses in abundance. To counter them, he would study the phenomena of null fields and pariah genes, learning how psychic suppression works. Through experimentation and observation, he might create synthetic countermeasures, devices that emit low-level psychic dampening fields, confusing weaker psychers and dulling the perception of stronger ones. He would also refine his own mental discipline, transforming his already formidable focus into near-psychic resistance. Years of meditation, emotional control, and trauma conditioning would allow him to suppress his mental signature, becoming invisible even to those who can see beyond sight. To a psycher scanning the area, Batman would appear as an emptiness, a void where a human presence should be. In urban environments like hive cities, his stealth methods would take on an architectural dimension. He would map the labyrinthine tunnels and industrial sectors, memorizing power grid cycles, security patrols, and surveillance patterns. He would manipulate those systems with surgical precision, triggering blackouts, redirecting servo skulls, and using environmental noise to mask his movements. Every shadow and every echo would become his ally. In the underhive he would move, unseen among the desperate and the criminal, appearing only when his intervention matters. His legend would grow with each act, stories spreading of a dark phantom that hunts slavers, heretics, and traitors. The fear he cultivates would become self-sustaining. People would begin to look over their shoulders even when he isn't there. and that paranoia would serve him better than any camouflage. Against the Imperium's military, stealth would demand precision timing. A single mistake could summon orbital bombardment or mass executions. Batman would learn to blend into the Imperium's bureaucracy, creating false identifications, hacking data slates, and planting fabricated evidence to redirect suspicion. He would use his detective skills to anticipate inquisitorial movements and infiltrate the system from within, becoming invisible through paperwork rather than shadows. He would also learn to exploit the rigid hierarchy of the Imperium. In a society where everyone obeys without question, he could impersonate authority figures by mastering their tone, body language, and command codes. His mastery of disguise would evolve into a psychological art. He would no longer hide from the system, but hide within it. Even on the battlefield, stealth would remain his greatest strength. While Space Marines rely on armor and firepower, Batman would rely on intelligence and misdirection. He would study the terrain, sabotage enemy supply lines, and eliminate key targets before a conflict even begins. Entire cult uprisings might collapse without him ever being seen, their leaders vanishing in the night, their plans unraveling under his calculated interference. To the survivors, it would seem like divine intervention or a curse. In truth, it would be the product of meticulous planning and stealth operations. In the void of space, where shadows have no meaning, Batman's stealth would extend to digital warfare. He would learn to navigate the Imperium's fractured data networks, infiltrating ship logs and encrypted channels. His AI systems would act as ghosts in the machine, feeding false readings to sensors and rerouting tracking systems. A patrol craft might pass within meters of his vessel without ever realizing it. His stealth would no longer be confined to physical presence. It would exist across dimensions of perception, both technological and psychological. The most profound adaptation, however, would come from the understanding that in the 40K universe, stealth is not just concealment, it is defiance. To remain unseen in a galaxy where gods, machines, and monsters fight for total control is to assert independence. Every time Batman disappears from the gaze of the Imperium or escapes the eyes of a demon, he reaffirms his identity as a free agent of logic and will in a place that worships submission. His mastery of stealth would evolve beyond survival into philosophy. It would be his rebellion against the galaxy's omnipresent tyranny. He would move unseen not merely to hide, but to remind the universe that even in an age where there is only war, there still exists something that cannot be found, controlled, or destroyed, a shadow that belongs to no one, guided only by purpose. Building alliances in the Warhammer 40K universe would test every aspect of Batman's strategic mind and moral judgment. The galaxy is a place where trust is almost extinct, and loyalty is bought with fear, faith, or blood. For someone like Batman, who has always worked in the gray spaces between law and chaos, finding allies in this reality would be both an opportunity and a danger. He would understand from the beginning that he cannot survive through isolation alone. Intelligence, resources, and influence are the real currencies of power in this universe. But every alliance he forms would come at a price, and every potential partner, whether from the Imperium, the Inquisition, or the Adeptus Mechanicus, would test his principles in ways he has never faced before. The first step in his strategy would be observation. Batman would not rush to join any faction or reveal himself openly. He would study the political and religious systems that hold the Imperium together, identifying which individuals still possess reason amid dogma. He would map the structure of authority from the lowest hive overseers to the High Lords of Terra, analyzing where corruption thrives and where cracks in the hierarchy appear. He would see the Imperium not as a unified entity, but as a web of competing interests, inquisitors fighting among themselves, rogue traders dealing in forbidden technology, and planetary governors hiding secrets from the administratum. These divisions would be his entry points. Batman has always known how to use conflict to his advantage, and in this universe, he would use it to establish a network of uneasy allies who serve his cause, without ever realizing they are part of it. The Inquisition would present both the greatest opportunity and the greatest threat. Its agents command absolute authority, moving freely across sectors to root out heresy and corruption. Batman would recognize that their investigative nature mirrors his own methods, though twisted by fanaticism. He would target the more pragmatic inquisitors, those who still value truth over blind faith. By saving one of them from a chaos ambush or uncovering a cult that even the Inquisition missed, he could earn a fragile respect. Over time, a few inquisitors might learn to tolerate his unorthodox methods, using him as an off-the-record operative. They would never fully trust him, but they would find him useful. To them, he would be a necessary evil, a silent weapon to deploy when bureaucracy and fear slow their work. Batman, in turn, would use their access to gather intelligence about the greater structure of the Imperium. It would be a dance of mutual exploitation, each side believing they are manipulating the other, when in truth, Batman's goals remain independent. The Adeptus Mechanicus would be another complex relationship. Their obsession with technology and their worship of the machine god would both fascinate and repulse him. He would see in them a distorted version of his own reliance on tools and invention. At first, they would consider him a heretic, an unlicensed manipulator of sacred machines. But if Batman could prove his understanding of technology exceeds even some magi, certain members might reconsider. He would approach the more radical tech priests, those who secretly experiment beyond sanctioned boundaries. By offering them fragments of his designs or insights into rediscovered principles of physics, he could establish an uneasy partnership. To them, he would appear as a mysterious intellect, perhaps even a lost servant of the Omnissiah returned from the void. These alliances would allow him access to rare materials and data, though always under the risk of exposure. Batman would understand that the Mechanicus cannot be trusted with absolute knowledge. He would give them enough to keep them intrigued, but never enough to uncover his full designs. Among the Astra Militarum, the ordinary soldiers of the Imperium, Batman would find a different kind of ally. These are men and women who fight and die every day, often without understanding why. He would see in them the same resilience and courage that define the best of humanity. By operating in the shadows alongside a regiment, protecting them during impossible missions, or preventing their commander's corruption from consuming them, he would earn their loyalty. Rumors would spread through the ranks about a silent protector who appears during hopeless battles and vanishes before dawn. The troops would begin to see him as a spirit of vengeance, a figure of hope who fights for the common man rather than the emperor. In a galaxy where faith is everything, Batman would inspire belief not in gods, but in human determination. He would not lead armies, but he would shape their morale. Soldiers who have seen him in action would fight harder, not because of divine command, but because they know that somewhere in the darkness, someone still cares about justice. Rogue traitors and outcasts would also play crucial roles in his network. These individuals exist outside Imperial law, traversing the galaxy with freedom that few others possess. Batman would see their independence as both a risk and an asset. By assisting a rogue traitor against chaos pirates or saving a crew from inquisitorial execution, he could secure their allegiance. In return, they could provide transportation, supplies, or information from sectors beyond Imperial reach. They would not understand his mission fully, but they would respect his efficiency and integrity. With them, he could move unseen across the stars, establishing his influence planet by planet. Not all alliances would be human. Batman's pragmatism would eventually lead him to study Xeno's species, particularly those whose motives align, however briefly, with his. He would never fully trust them, but he would recognize that in a universe where survival outweighs purity, even temporary cooperation can serve a purpose. The Eldar, for instance, might intrigue him with their mastery of stealth and foresight. A brief truce with an Eldar Farseer could provide him access to knowledge of the warp that even the Imperium fears. Such alliances would always be fragile, held together by necessity and mutual respect rather than trust. Batman's ability to navigate moral ambiguity would be what allows him to maintain these relationships without succumbing to their influence. Through all these alliances, Batman would maintain one principle: never submission, never compromise of purpose. Each ally would serve a role, but none would define his identity. He would become the invisible link between factions that would never speak to each other directly. The Inquisition might act on intelligence that actually originates from the Mechanicus, who in turn are unknowingly manipulated by data Batman feeds through rogue traders. His web of alliances would function like his network in Gotham, but on a galactic scale. Every favor, every connection, every alliance would be a thread in his unseen strategy to bring balance and justice to a universe drowning in corruption. To the people of the Imperium, he would be a myth, but to those who work in the shadows, he would become something far more powerful, a silent architect of order in a galaxy ruled by chaos. In the end, his resistance to chaos would not be about purity, but control. He would accept that the potential for corruption exists within him, as it does within everyone, but he would never let it define him. His self-awareness would become the ultimate defense. Even in a universe where gods feed on emotion and the warp consumes reason, Batman's identity, the unbreakable code that he is and always has been, would remain intact. Chaos would tempt him, threaten him, and try to twist him, but it would never understand him. Because while chaos represents endless change and decay, Batman represents something the galaxy has almost forgotten: willpower that refuses to bend. A mind that refuses to break, and a soul that, even surrounded by madness, remains human. Chaos corruption in the Warhammer 40K universe is unlike anything Batman has ever faced. It is not a tangible enemy that can be fought with fists or gadgets, but a creeping influence that infects the mind, the soul, and even reality itself. The four Chaos gods, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh feed on emotion and thought, twisting every strength into a weakness. Batman's determination could become obsession, his discipline could become control, his intelligence could become arrogance, and his grief could become despair. The very traits that define him are the same ones chaos would exploit to consume him. His war against corruption would not only be external, but an endless battle within himself, fought in silence and solitude across the darkness of the galaxy. The first signs of corruption would not come from grand temptations or demonic whispers, but from subtle changes in his perception. He would see the horrors of the Imperium, the tyranny of the ecclesiarchy, the blind obedience of its citizens, and the endless suffering of the innocent, and feel a growing rage. The part of him that has always wanted to save humanity would begin to question whether it is even worth saving. Chaos would whisper that the galaxy is beyond redemption, that justice is a lie in a universe ruled by fear. It would tempt him to embrace control, to impose order through absolute power. Batman's mind, always teetering on the edge between reason and obsession, would feel that pull like a gravity well. Every mission, every moral decision would carry the risk of crossing a line so thin it barely exists. He would understand early on that traditional defenses against corruption, faith, ignorance, and denial mean nothing to him. He has no god to pray to, no superstition to hide behind, no illusions about the nature of evil. His only weapon is discipline, the control of his own mind. But in the warp, even thoughts have weight. Every doubt, every fear, every fragment of guilt creates ripples that entities like Tzeentch can sense. Batman would respond by pushing his mental training to its absolute limit. He would meditate in isolation chambers designed to block psychic resonance, teaching himself to compartmentalize emotion until even psychic entities cannot grasp it. His willpower, forged through years of trauma and loss, would become a psychic barrier of its own, a human fortress that chaos cannot easily breach. Still, chaos is patient. It would not attack directly, but would try to infiltrate his mission through justification. It might appear to him in dreams as his parents, urging him to bring peace by purging corruption through fear and death. It might show him visions of a galaxy where his methods create perfect order, where every criminal, heretic, and tyrant is eliminated in the name of justice. He would recognize these illusions for what they are: tools, designed to make him believe that he can use chaos without being consumed by it. He has seen that lie before in other forms, in Gotham's villains who thought they could control their madness. He would know that power offered without limits is never a gift. To resist corruption, Batman would establish strict psychological and operational protocols. He would isolate himself from prolonged exposure to the warp, limit contact with psychers, and cleanse his mind after every mission involving chaos-tainted objects. He would build sanctuaries shielded with psychic nullifiers and mechanicus tech, places where his thoughts remain his own. He would keep detailed records of his mental state, analyzing himself as if he were one of his own cases. Whenever he feels anger rising, he would trace its source, identify whether it is human or something else whispering behind it. His detective instincts, honed to uncover deception, would turn inward. He would treat his own mind as a crime scene, always searching for evidence of intrusion. There would be moments when resistance feels impossible. The warp would send hallucinations so vivid they blur reality. He might see Alfred's face twisted by demonic influence, or hear the screams of Gotham citizens dying again and again in his dreams. Batman's guilt has always been his most powerful vulnerability, and chaos would strike it relentlessly. It would tell him that he failed to save Gotham, that he failed to save Jason, that every death in his world, and this one, is his fault. The voices would not ask him to surrender, but to atone by embracing destruction. It would be the ultimate test of his purpose, to hold on to justice not because it works, but because it is right. Even when everything tells him it's meaningless, he would find strength in his clarity. Batman's greatest gift is that he does not fight evil for reward or hope. He fights it because he must. Chaos cannot comprehend that kind of resolve. To a demon, all motivation stems from desire, lust, rage, ambition, or decay. But Batman's motivation is born of loss and duty, emotions that resist consumption because they carry no satisfaction. He acts without expectation, without need. In a universe where every soul belongs to one god or another, his detachment would make him an anomaly. The warp feeds on emotion, and Batman's emotion is controlled so completely that it becomes starvation for chaos. He would not suppress his humanity, but direct it like a weapon, channeling fear, pain, and sorrow into focus rather than despair. Encounters with chaos cults would challenge his restraint in other ways. He would see ordinary people twisted into monsters, their bodies mutated, their minds enslaved. Sometimes killing them would seem like mercy, but he would refuse to become judge, jury, and executioner unless absolutely necessary. Each time he chooses restraint over rage, he reinforces his own resistance. He would begin to understand that every moral decision is a shield. Each time he spares a life or fights without hatred, he weakens chaos's grip. In a sense, his morality becomes a form of psychic armor, invisible but unbreakable. There would be times when he uses chaos's own unpredictability against it. By studying demonic behavior, he would learn to anticipate its manipulations, setting traps that exploit their arrogance. He would never rely on sorcery or forbidden artifacts, but he would weaponize chaos's blindness to discipline. A demon expecting greed or fury would find only silence and calculation. A god seeking devotion would find only rejection. Batman would become an unyielding constant, a figure that defies corruption not by avoiding darkness, but by mastering it. Batman's version of justice in the Warhammer 40K universe would be an anomaly, a spark of rational morality in a galaxy that has forgotten what justice even means. The Imperium's concept of justice is built on obedience, faith, and fear. To question the Emperor's word is heresy, and heresy means death. To the Inquisition, the innocent are simply those not yet proven guilty, and to the Adeptus Arbites, order is more important than truth. Batman would look upon this system with the same analytical, relentless focus he once directed at Gotham's corruption. He would see a civilization so consumed by its need to survive that it has sacrificed every principle of compassion and fairness. In such a place, justice as Batman understands it, a balance between punishment and redemption, would be revolutionary. But he would also know that idealism without realism is suicide. So his justice would adapt, evolve, and reshape itself to survive within the nightmare of the 41st millennium without losing its core. He would start by redefining his purpose. In Gotham, his mission was to end crime without crossing the line into killing. But in a galaxy where killing is currency and mercy is weakness, he would have to recalibrate his principles without betraying them. He would understand that not every life can be saved, and that sometimes the most moral act is to prevent greater suffering, even if it requires bloodshed. Yet, even then, Batman would never become an executioner. He would focus not on punishment, but prevention. His war would not be against individuals, but systems corruption, fanaticism, and tyranny. He would dismantle networks of oppression the same way he once dismantled organized crime, piece by piece. Until their foundations collapse under their own contradictions, the Imperium's soldiers and citizens would struggle to understand his sense of morality. To them, the Emperor's will is absolute, and justice is whatever preserves the Imperium. Batman would reject that blind faith. He would see the Emperor as both a tragic figure and a warning, a man who tried to save humanity through power and control, only to create a machine that devoured its own soul. Batman's justice would not be built on worship, but accountability. He would believe that even those who serve noble causes must be held responsible for their actions. When he exposes an inquisitor who executes innocents to preserve political power, or when he saves a heretic child from being burned alive because of a misunderstanding, he would not do it to defy the Imperium, but to remind humanity that justice without empathy is nothing but tyranny dressed in ritual. His methods would remain rooted in his detective nature. He would investigate before he judges, always seeking the truth buried beneath lies and propaganda. When a chaos cult is discovered, he would not assume guilt by association. He would study how it formed, who was desperate, who was manipulated, and who truly embraced corruption. He would punish the guilty but protect the manipulated. In doing so, he would reveal a side of justice the Imperium no longer recognizes, the idea that intent matters. His actions would seem alien to the Inquisition, who see all impurity as equal. But as word of his intervention spreads, whispers would emerge among the oppressed. Stories of a shadowed figure who brings judgment not from dogma, but from fairness. A figure who asks questions before drawing a blade. A figure who stands against monsters, but never becomes one. The contrast between Batman's morality and the galaxy's brutality would create friction even within himself. There would be moments when he questions whether his code has meaning here. When he witnesses an entire city exterminated by exterminatists to prevent chaos spread, he would feel the full weight of his helplessness. In Gotham, he could save one life at a time, but here, billions die in minutes. Yet this despair would not break him. It would refine him. He would realize that justice in this universe cannot be measured by victory or defeat, but by persistence. Even saving one innocent in a galaxy of trillions would be an act of defiance against the darkness. His justice would become not a system, but a symbol, a reminder that humanity still has a choice, even in a world that insists it. DOESN, single quotes T. His enemies would view him differently. To the Inquisition, he would be a dangerous heretic who undermines faith. To the ecclesiarchy, he would be a false saint who performs miracles without prayer. To chaos, he would be a threat unlike any other, a mortal who cannot be corrupted because he does not seek power, pleasure, or faith. They would call him the shadow of doubt, the one who makes humans question the divine order of things. Batman's justice would infect the galaxy not through force, but through example. Those who witness his actions would begin to wonder, if one man can act with reason and mercy, then perhaps the Emperor's will is not the only path. Even among the Adeptus Astartes, the superhuman warriors of the Imperium, Batman's principles would earn a strange respect. Some chapters, like the Dark Angels or the Raven Guard, would recognize the value of his methods, his use of intelligence, fear, and precision. They would see in him a reflection of their own secrecy and determination. Others, more zealous ones like the Black Templars, would consider him a dangerous anomaly, a man who refuses to worship the Emperor yet still fights for humanity. They would call him misguided but undeniably effective. His actions would force even these warriors to confront uncomfortable truths about faith and morality. Batman's justice would not seek to replace the Imperium's law, but to expose its hypocrisy. He would understand that overthrowing the system outright would only lead to chaos, so he would operate beneath it, changing outcomes one decision at a time. He would use his knowledge and alliances to manipulate bureaucratic channels, free prisoners wrongfully accused of heresy, and quietly sabotage inquisitorial purges. His justice would function like a shadow government of conscience, unseen but always present. To some, he would be a myth. To others, a silent rebellion against a godlike tyranny. Every act of justice he delivers would be a message, not to institutions, but to individuals. He would remind soldiers that mercy is not weakness, remind priests that faith without compassion is meaningless, and remind leaders that fear cannot sustain loyalty forever. His legend would spread quietly across the stars, carried by survivors and witnesses, growing into something larger than life. Some would paint him as an angel, others as a demon. But the truth would remain simple. Batman stands for a kind of justice that the galaxy has forgotten, justice grounded not in power, divinity, or conquest, but in choice, restraint, and moral clarity. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where every act of goodness is swallowed by despair, Batman's justice would not seek to conquer the galaxy, only to preserve its last fragments of humanity. His mission would evolve from protecting a city to preserving the concept of moral order itself. Even if no one remembers his name, his influence would remain, a quiet force that pushes back against endless cruelty. A reminder that even in a universe consumed by war, the idea of justice can still cast a shadow deep enough to defy the light of false gods.